In the first 8 seconds, the screen should feel like a door closing behind the viewer. Because history did not just record medical progress, it buried the bodies that paid for it. Charleston, 1847. The Medical College of South Carolina, admired by the aristocracy, whispered about by everyone else. 23 enslaved men, women, and children purchased at nearly triple the normal price and returned 90 days later, broken, limping, silent, traumatized. 12 could still walk. 7 needed help. 4 never spoke again. Not a single owner objected. They had been paid well, and with an additional clause, these people could never be resold within state borders again. That small detail alone told the truth. Something had happened to them that could never be allowed to see daylight. Something so barbaric that even slave markets wouldn't touch them afterward. For nearly 2 centuries, nobody asked what happened in that basement. They preferred ignorance because the truth would reveal this. The advancement of science was not an achievement. It was an autopsy performed on human morality itself. The basement was not part of the original blueprints. It was added secretly, funded by private donors who left no names, only sealed payments and instructions delivered at night by carriage. Workers who dug it out were dismissed within weeks, many escorted off the property without collecting final pay. One mason disappeared entirely, last seen entering the lower stairwell with his tools, never witnessed leaving. Newspapers never mentioned it, yet whispers spread through Charleston taverns. Underground rooms, reinforced doors, ventilation ducts leading somewhere no architect could explain. And the strangest rumor of all, soundproofing, unheard of in mid-century America, but requested explicitly by the men funding the construction. Because whatever happened down there was not meant to be heard by anyone, not even by accident. Entry required a key and 2 people present at all times. A third man, usually a young medical assistant, logged the time of every opening and closure in a leather ledger that has never surfaced. Some say it was burned. Others claim it was seized when Union forces arrived. But there are copies, handwritten duplicates passed secretly among certain physicians, protected like relics. It is from one of those copies that we know the truth. The basement wasn't a laboratory. It was a transformation chamber. The first recorded subject was a man listed only as a patient note 7. No name, no age, no birthplace. He had ceased being a human being the moment he was purchased. According to the surviving notes, he entered the chamber healthy, physically strong, and mentally alert. 12 hours later, he was unrecognizable. The records described tremors so violent his restraints damaged the iron bolts, anchoring them to the floor. His body temperature dropped to levels incompatible with life, yet he did not die. His pupils dilated until there was no iris left, just black voids reflecting the lantern light. One assistant wrote that when he leaned close to check the man's breathing, patient Nuttazone 7 whispered a sentence that froze him in place. "You've opened the wrong door." After that, the experiments were not halted, they intensified. Whatever was being injected wasn't medicine. The formula included mercury compounds, animal organ extracts, opium derivatives, and something labeled only as a tincture now. 5 ingredients never explained by any physician on file. The objective wasn't healing, it wasn't curing, it was reshaping, pushing human beings beyond natural limits, breaking them down to rebuild them as something else. And the doctors didn't fear the moral consequences. They feared that failure meant someone above them would shut the entire college down, and not out of compassion. They carried the bodies only when the moon was thick enough to hide movement, but thin enough to still see the path. 41 men taken from Beaumont in silence, dragged into the tobacco fields with ropes, tied around their wrists like livestock. It was said no one ever heard a scream, not a cry, not even a prayer, which suggested something even darker. They were sedated, drugged, or already dead. Workers who survived claimed the ground shook that night, not from footsteps, but from something underneath, something ancient, awakening. The plantation soil, black with centuries of labor and soaked with blood, seemed to pulse like a living organ. Why would a tobacco farm need 41 men at midnight? Some said it wasn't tobacco at all growing in the dark rows, that beneath the leaves, hidden from daylight, was a secret chamber built generations earlier, a vault, a lab, a temple. The children who worked the fields whispered that the Chamberlain family was not just wealthy, they were chosen. They were chosen. Chosen by whom? No one dared ask. The missing men were never declared dead, never searched for, never mentioned in court records. It was as if they never existed. Some said silence was the real crime. Others said silence was the real spell. By morning, the plantation looked unchanged. Sunlight poured over the rolling fields. The smell of tobacco drying in the barns carried on the humid Tennessee air, and the overseers walked the property as if nothing had happened. But everyone noticed the missing faces. 41 beds were empty. 41 work assignments were quietly erased from the ledger. Supervisors avoided eye contact, and the Chamberlain ledger keeper locked his office door before sunrise, as though numbers themselves had become dangerous. Rumors ran through the quarters like wildfire. Some said the men had been sold, others that they had tried escaping and were punished. But deep down, no one believed either, because the dogs never barked. The chains at the east fence were never cut. No rider left the property. Something took those men without disturbing a single blade of grass. That was the part that terrified people most. The old midwife, Eliza, who had lived through 40 years on the land, swore she heard chanting that night, low and rhythmic, like a hymn sung in reverse. Children claimed they saw lanterns moving underground through cracks in the earth. And the Chamberlain family, they said nothing. They just ate breakfast with calm faces, as if 41 souls had not vanished into the soil beneath their very home. Weeks passed and fear began to rot the plantation from the inside. Workers stopped laughing at night. Songs once sung in whispered rebellion faded into quiet breathing and sleepless eyes staring at cracked ceilings. Nobody wanted to be outside after sundown, not even the overseers, and they were armed. Something was changing in the land itself. The soil grew darker, richer, oily, like it had been fed with something more than water and fertilizer. Corn planted near the northern edge sprouted twice as tall as anywhere else, but the slaves working those rows refused to eat it. They claimed the crops were warm to the touch, like skin. The Chamberlain family brought in a doctor from Nashville, not for the workers, but for the plants. He examined leaves and stems and roots, but never asked the real question burning in everyone's mind. What did the earth consume to make something grow so unnaturally fast? Late one night, Isaac, the strongest man on the plantation, swore he heard knocking coming from beneath the fields. Not digging, not movement, knocking. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. Like a signal, like the men buried alive beneath the surface were calling for help. No one dared investigate. By midday, the men who had once been 41 were still counted among the living, yet something had changed in the air. The boundary between the known and the unnatural had been shattered, and no one could walk the grounds unafraid ever again. Night fell like a suffocating curtain, swallowing Charleston in a darkness that felt deliberate, as if the city itself conspired to hide what transpired in the medical college basement. Carraway's journals lay scattered across tables, their pages filled with precise cruelty, diagrams etched in ink that smelled faintly of iron. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the narrow streets, carrying rumors that no one dared speak aloud. Number 7, Dina, sat huddled against a cold wall, counting each heartbeat, each shallow breath of those around her. She could hear the faint groans of the monkeys locked in cages nearby, and wondered whether the pain she endured mirrored theirs. Or if there was a difference humans could never truly fathom. Pinckney lingered in the shadows, torn between duty, fear, and the creeping realization that history itself was being written in agony. Each experiment was more invasive than the last, each test a calculated step toward a revelation that no one outside would believe. And yet for every scream stifled, for everybody broken, an ember of defiance grew in the hearts of the human subjects. They memorized instruments, watched the patterns of Carraway's hand, and began plotting survival strategies. The basement had become a crucible of endurance and resistance, a place where science and barbarity collided and where the strongest men and women would either be reshaped or destroyed. By the second week of April, the basement had transformed into a chamber of dread, each shadow a potential harbinger of pain. Carraway's experiments escalated, moving from observation to invasive testing, probing the limits of human endurance. Controlled injuries became routine, chemical doses calibrated to precise milligrams, each procedure documented in cold clinical detail. The human subjects bore the marks of terror and conditioning, their silence no longer a sign of submission, but of survival. Number 12, Marcus, had stopped speaking entirely, his eyes vacant yet burning with the unspoken knowledge of what awaited him. The monkeys shrieked incessantly, their cries echoing off stone walls, filling the air with a symphony of suffering. Pinckney began to hesitate, a storm of doubt churning beneath his careful exterior, as he witnessed the physical and psychological unraveling of those in the room. Yet Carraway remained detached, calculating, convinced he was unraveling truths the world was not ready to see. Dina, watching from the corner, began teaching subtle signals to the others, small gestures to communicate without words, a silent network of resistance growing among the terrified. The basement had become more than a laboratory. It was a battlefield of wills. One misstep, one moment of hesitation could mean death, and every survivor silently swore they would see this horror end. By mid-April, the experiments had reached a new horrifying level. Carraway introduced plant extracts and chemical compounds, substances derived from medicine and poison alike, measuring reactions with meticulous precision. Monkey C convulsed violently and died from a derivative of nightshade. The human subjects endured doses that would have felled ordinary men, emerging disoriented, trembling, and in some cases, temporarily amnesic. Carraway marveled at what he interpreted as a superior resistance, blind to the truth. These were survivors forged by brutality, conditioned to endure what others could not. Pinckney began keeping a secret journal, documenting everything he saw, every act of cruelty, every lie Carraway told himself about scientific objectivity. Dina watched him from the shadows, recognizing in his hesitation a faint glimmer of conscience. She began planting small, urgent instructions, urging the others to memorize procedures, details, every page in Carraway's meticulous notebooks. Survival now meant more than bearing pain, it meant remembering it, transforming memory into evidence, building a lifeline that might expose the truth. Carraway's obsession blinded him, his mind consumed by the pursuit of objective knowledge, while the basement became a crucible of terror and quiet defiance. And somewhere in the corner, Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the fracture of what he once was, knowing that the survival of the others might rest on the narrow edge of one student's choice. The air was thick with fear, and the first stirrings of rebellion. As April bled into May, Carraway's methods grew even more invasive. He began delicate neurological observations, seeking the secrets of the human nervous system itself. The monkeys were disassembled with ruthless precision, their spinal cords and nerve fibers catalogued, jars filling with specimens that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. When he turned his gaze toward the human subjects, the tension became unbearable. Number 12 Marcus had stopped speaking entirely, a shell of himself, while Number 7's hands shook uncontrollably. Dina whispered strategies to the others in hushed tones, planting in their minds the seed of resistance. Memorize everything. Remember the instruments, the doses, the sequences. Pinckney, tormented by guilt, began taking risks, hiding pages of Carraway's notes, copying diagrams, cataloging every atrocity. The basement became a theater of terror and quiet insurgency, where the oppressed documented their torment, knowing the value of memory in a world that denied them voice. The screams of monkeys and humans echoed off the stone walls, a symphony of suffering Carraway interpreted as scientific data. Outside, Charleston moved obliviously, commerce and gentility unaware of the cruelty beneath its streets. But beneath the veneer of Southern civility, something was stirring, a dangerous, unacknowledged intelligence, a plan born from desperation, ready to expose truths that the city's elite would kill to keep hidden. Survival had become strategy. Observation had become rebellion. By late May, the air in the basement had thickened with fear and anticipation. Carraway's obsession had reached its apex. He no longer saw humans, only data points. The human subjects moved like shadows of themselves, eyes hollow, bodies taut with tension, each step a testament to survival against unimaginable cruelty. Dina and the others had learned the rhythms of pain, of instruments, of Carraway's moods. They whispered quietly, marking every detail in their memory, storing it like forbidden gold. Pinckney's duplicity grew bolder. Pages of the doctor's meticulous notes were secreted away, wrapped in cloth, hidden under floorboards, every theft a silent act of defiance. And then, one night, Carraway decided the culmination of his work demanded something irreversible. A neurological procedure on Marcus, the former blacksmith, intended to expose the innermost workings of his nervous system while keeping him conscious. The mistake was almost inevitable. Fatigue and obsession clouded Carraway's hand. and a severed artery turned a procedure into a life-or-death struggle. Blood filled the air, panic replaced calculation. Marcus teetered on the edge of death, and yet, somehow, he clung to life. The basement erupted in chaos, but within that chaos, a spark ignited. Dina and the others moved instinctively, shielding him, tending to wounds with nothing but instinct and desperate hope. For the first time, control shifted. The powerless had begun to assert power, and the darkest secrets of Charleston were on the verge of exposure. Dawn broke over Charleston on June 12th, but the basement of the medical college remained a battlefield of silence and horror. Marcus lay unconscious, the metallic tang of blood still heavy in the air, yet he had survived where death had seemed certain. Dina and the others huddled close, sharing warmth and whispered reassurances, their bodies a shield against the lingering threat of Caraway's return. Pinckney arrived, heart-hammering, and the truth of the night's events slammed into him. The calculated cruelty he had witnessed, the line between science and sadism, irreversibly crossed. Rutland was summoned, and the facade of authority cracked. Even the dean could not ignore the carnage. Caraway, bloodied and frenzied, babbled about data, about proof, blind to the human lives teetering around him. Outside, the currents of Charleston society shifted. Samuel's network, Grimke's contacts, and the whispered accounts of surviving subjects began to coalesce, a slow, inexorable revelation that would ripple far beyond these walls. The enslaved had survived not through compliance, but through strategy, courage, and the audacity to record the atrocities in memory and in stolen pages. The experiment, intended to dominate and measure, had backfired. Power had slipped into unexpected hands. And as the city awakened, the whispers began, growing louder each hour. The story of human suffering, defiance, and the fragile, dangerous line between control and chaos, now unstoppable. The first cracks in the empire of secrecy had appeared. By the evening of June 12th, the story had escaped the walls of the college, carried through invisible networks, whispered in markets, churches, and back alleys. Newspapers in Philadelphia, Boston, and New York seized the documents, the stolen pages that bore witness to horrors no one dared name aloud in Charleston. Caraway's ambition, once towering, crumbled under the weight of exposure. His meticulous notes, intended to immortalize his discoveries, instead became proof of unspeakable cruelty. The enslaved survivors, their bodies scarred and minds fractured, carried something more valuable than life alone. They carried truth. Dina, Marcus, and the others had endured the unbearable, and through their survival, they had rewritten the rules of who held power. The medical college was forced to act. Caraway removed. The experiments ended. A formal inquiry promised that would never fully reach justice. And yet, the real lesson lay elsewhere. The veneer of science, the pretense of authority, the carefully constructed moral justifications, all were fragile constructs, exposed by courage, witness, and the refusal to remain silent. This was a truth no institution, no elite could erase. If you understand what you've seen, if you feel the weight of knowledge few are permitted to grasp, comment now. I see the hidden truth. Type it twice. Say it. Let it anchor the awakening within you. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some knowledge changes a man forever.